We are doing Cities of Sigmar Dispossessed, baby. Woo! Wibbity wabbity, welcome to War Games on Toast. It's me, it's Toast, and I have a cold and my voice is going away. So if this video sounds absolutely god awful, that is why, but I didn't want to miss my deadline. So the video's here regardless, and you just have to suffer through my terrible, breaking, and ill voice. Apologies in advance, let's rock some dwarfs. But before we get into all of that, please consider hitting like, subscribe, and leaving a comment as it helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, please consider signing up to my Patreon or YouTube members to get some swanky perks. Groovy. Huge shout out to our new members and patrons, the Hedonite of Paint and Kitty Cowan Prakamakul. Your support truly means the world, but now it is time to get on with the show. It's the window cleaner.
Toast told lies. He can't speak anymore, so hi, I'm Mrs. Toast, and I'm going to wing this whole video for him. I have no idea what any of this means, but I've been assured it makes sense, and is sound advice, maybe. Let's cut some fat and skip some of our redundant stuff and get right into the thick, hairy, burly meat of it all, reactions. We have one, and it's frickin' awesome. What does it do? Simple. If any of your dudes takes the L and gets clapped harder than the juiciest of cheeks, you get to react. You can then pick any other friendly fighter, allies included, and they immediately get to make a bonus move or a bonus attack action. This is outstanding. One of the best abilities in the game is it allows you to gain advantages to action economy. It has no range, no line of sight restriction, and no rune mark restriction. Every time one of your models dies and you have a reaction to burn, your opponent is fueling your game. This is especially good for moving your slow dudes and hitting with your big dudes, naturally. These chaps have two core abilities that can be used by every Tom, Dick and Harry. Grim Last Stand is first on the block and it's pretty darn good. You'll see a theme going forward, and that is you guys like to be little walls. They like to stand around on objectives and tank as much as possible. Grim Last Stand lets you do this by decreasing all damage you and any of your pals within 3 inches take by 1, providing they don't move this battle round. Basically useless turn 1, but once you're on a point, it's not a bad idea to pop this to be a burly ball of steel. Over My Dead Body is up next, and this is faction defining. This ability is good. I can see most order players allying in a Dispossessed to gain access to it because it's stupid. It's even better for us though, since every single model we have can use this. This lets your dudes count 3 models when standing on objectives. This stacks, so in theory, one model could use this twice in one turn by waiting and count as 5. You pop this on any objective at risk of being taken. Easy. Let's look at their units now and check out what these classic stunties have to offer. The Iron Warden is, in a few choice words, really fucking crap. He is very expensive, has an awful defense line, pretty pants range attack, all things considered, and can't fight in close combat. So what's he good for? Flesh Melting Torrent. Now that's a great ability in theory. Your guys aren't great at killing stuff, so you can use this to make chunky enemies easier to hurt. But is that ability worth 160 points? Yeah, no, not really. Skip. The Warden King is your go-to beefcake. He has great stats for his cost. He's not all that killy, but with minimal investment, you can make Strength 5 or boost his defenses to make him a very hard to shift wall. Just a solid bundle of stats who does what you would expect. His quad's not great though. It has its place since it lets you move your slow dudes, but it's got a limited range, isn't very flashy, and frankly you can get similar abilities without burning a quad with allies. It's okay as a hyper-situational ability, but it's not a selling point. This guy's slightly better than the Iron Warden, but that isn't saying much. Fairly expensive for stats that are worse than the Warden King. Sure, you get a ranged attack, but it's not good enough to really care about. Raking Fire for a triple is also a terrible use of dice, considering how underwhelming his gun is. Sure, it works for both actions if you fire twice, and the damage is fine. Are you really spending 145 points and a triple for 4 pistol shots at 2/4 damage? Probably not. This guy's a cheap bruiser and not too bad for his price. His defenses are a bit on the crappy side if we're being honest, but he hits harder than a Warden King and has a really interesting ability that combines both rush and onslaught with some caveats. Thankfully, none of those caveats matter with the Keeper of the Gate, since he fills all the requirements himself. Sweet. He's okay. I like him, but I'm not sure I would take him. He'd be an early cut, I imagine. So, the old guard is okay again. 115 points for 16 wounds and toughness 5 is fine, I guess. He's a bit of a noodle in combat, but he's a decent platform for blessings, specifically +4 wounds or maybe +1 toughness. His ability is very nice too, allowing you to buff the strength of all dispossessed within 6 inches by 1, on a double to boot, so it's cheap. Very handy if supporting things like hammerers, but this ability can be found on cheaper models, as we will soon see. He's a decent package overall. The Rune Lord is great. He has a solid defensive line, thanks to toughness 4 and 20 wounds. He's okay in combat, thanks to that strength 4, 2-4 profile, and he's cheap. 115 points as a steal. Throw on bonus wounds or toughness, and he's good to go as a budget Warden King. His ability is great too, allowing you to buff the strength of a single ally by up to 3, with a whopping 9 inches of range, and it's a double. Super handy for getting damage through, and even better when you consider it can be used on allies too. The Iron Beard is too expensive, despite being the cheapest leader we have. His stats are fine for his price defensively, but his defense is just a bit crappy. He has a cool ability, but again, you can get this on other models for cheaper. If you're starved for points and need that 5 points to legalize your list, then take this over a Rune Lord. Otherwise, skip. Now this is the secret sauce, the true heroes of the faction. Well, one is. The Bomber is noticeably worse in my opinion since it's more expensive, slower and harder to bless. Sure, it has +1 strength in melee, but we aren't using these for melee. The Gyrocopter, being movement 12, is hilarious. You move this thing 24 inches, ideally at the end of the turn, and land on an objective, and pop over my dead body. You then take that objective since you had your pick, and then you repeat this process until the game ends or you die. Now this thing has 22 wounds and toughness 4, so it's not the easiest thing to kill, and we are going to be buffing whenever we can with blessings. For 15 points, bringing this thing to 26 wounds is just a good time. I would always take a gyro in a mission pack that has a leaning towards objectives. I would go as far as saying this is the star of the show. Hammerers are great. They are cheap, somewhat tanky, with toughness 4 and 12 wounds, and hit pretty darn hard for their points. They won't blow you away, but they do work. They are your bruisers, your frontline smackers, and they fill that role nicely. The Kingsguard ability requires a bit of work to, well, work, since a dispossessed hero needs to be engaged anywhere on the board, but it's nice to have in a pinch. Great Axe Longbeards fill a very similar role to hammers, only they are just as expensive and deal less damage since they lose a point of crit. On the plus side, they get the ability to buff strength in a 6-inch bubble, and this is really cool. You might want to drop a hammerer in a battleground and replace it with a Longbeard to add some reliability against tougher targets. This guy's fine. Ranged attack sucks, melee attack sucks. Defensive stats are great, identical to the hammerer and Longbeard. So why do you take an Iron Drake? It's triple to melt someone's toughness. There's definitely play here, but I'm concerned that you're going to be very dice hungry as dispossessed. You might want to experiment and flex an Iron Drake from time to time. Considering this ability turns even the toughest of enemies into paper, it has some play. Give it a go. Another Longbeard rocking the same ability and slightly worse offensive stats, although not by much, and he's cheaper. So this guy is 80 points and has toughness 5 and 12 wounds. He's a little wall, and he has a 3-3-2-4 damage profile, which is almost good. His ability to buff his own strength and everyone around him is very good, as we've already said. Great for sitting on points, buffing dudes, and using over my dead body. He does have competition though, and that's from the Ironbreakers. These guys have identical stats defensively, but are far worse offensively. On the flip side, they have built-in movement shenanigans that help you Ironbreakers move each other up the board with a bit of finagling. Depending on your composition, I think that Ironbreakers have their place, especially if you're trying to save points. In general, I would maybe consider Longbeards over them, but those movement tricks allowing you to pull other Ironbreakers up the board is great on turn 1 when you aren't necessarily going all out with Over My Dead Body. Just be aware, these are just tanky chaff. They will do nothing in combat. When it comes to allies, I haven't had enough time to really dig through everything and find the perfect dudes, but I have come up with some things that should work. Starting with Annihilators, these add something your list lacks: ultra high toughness and massive damage, and reach. Grandhammers are really good here because they have strength 6, which is enough, and 3-5 damage. They hit hard and are great. The cheaper shield dude is also fine. He loses a pip of strength and gains +1 toughness, bringing him to a whopping 7 toughness. If you can afford the Grandhammer, take the Grandhammer though. The Runefather is great because he adds some very nice abilities from the Flameseekers. Namely, he can move 9 inches a turn on a double, and he can turn his misses into crits, really accelerating his damage beyond what you would expect for his profile. He's also fairly tanky, making him a nice bruiser. If you can't afford a prime, then honestly, the Runefather does a great job of filling that role. Calthea Zandaya is always a consideration. She's just very good. Okay in combat, good defenses, not that expensive, and access to coordinated strike to get your guys moving and attacking more often. Since you don't have many triples worth using, she doesn't have much competition in that regard either. She helps patch the glaring mobility issues the dispossessed tend to suffer from. So, let's look at some example lists before calling it a day. This list is all about playing the objective. You have a Warden King, Gyrocopter with +4 wounds, 5 hammerers, and 3 iron breakers. You could easily drop a hammerer or 2 for a Longbeard with Great Weapon to give you a bit more kill potential and versatility. I just made this to a theme. The goal here is simple. You get on objectives and you live. Don't stick around in combat when you don't have to. Play smart, stay alive, and use your copter to twock far off locations and pressure your opponent's points. With a couple of doubles invested in Over My Dead Body, this list functionally has closer to 14 potential bodies on objectives, making it very hard to shift them. Use this ability wisely and shut down attempts to take your stuff. Also, if you can straddle points, then always straddle points. And that's it. The Dispossessed are really interesting, but have a playstyle that might not appeal to everyone. I like them a lot, and I think they have the potential to be very powerful in objective games. However, they probably aren't for me because I like to hit things. I am a simple man. Give them a go though, and let me know what you think of them. And that's the end of the video. If you made it this far, then you were an absolute legend. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to help the channel out. Special thanks to my patrons and members who are helping me fund future Warcry endeavours. Their names are on screen now. Sign up to join them. Huge thanks to the algorithmic demon slayers, Brioche, which may be me, and Kitty Cowan Praka Makul. Until next time, lads, ladies, and everyone in between and beyond, ta-ra! What the fuck is that?